Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Ixalan spoilers, and Hascon is kicked off, which means we have a ton of stuff to talk about today. There were spoilers last night during the MTG Arena stream, there's spoilers coming out today, so that means we gotta jump right into it, or this video is gonna be like 45 minutes long. So first off, we have our next, and I think our last Planeswalker from Ixalan, Vraska Relic Seeker. This one was just spoiled over at Hascon, and it's a pretty sweet card. 6 mana, you get 6 loyalty. The +2 makes a pirate with menace, a 2/2. -3 destroys an artifact, creature, or enchantment, also gives you a treasure token. And then -10 puts a player's life total to 1. One single point of damage will kill your opponent with the ultimate. The thing I like most about Vraska, and there's a bunch of things, but it only takes 2 pluses. The numbers line up really well. So with Vraska, you play it, you can go 2 directions. You can +2/+2, making blockers to keep Vraska alive, and then you just -10, and chances are you can kill your opponent somehow. It only takes 1 menace pirate attack to finish the game. It only takes a gut shot to finish the game. The other option is you play it and you just -3/-3, you get to kill 2 things, which is a great deal anyway. So no matter what direction you go, the math just lines up really well on Vraska. I think the Planeswalker it reminds me of most, and this might be a bit of a sketchy comparison, but it's a little bit like Elspeth's Sun's Champion. You get 2+ to make tokens to defend your big 6 mana Planeswalker. And the upside of Vraska is it has even more loyalty than Elspeth. So while you don't get 3 chump blockers, so it doesn't quite defend as well, you get 1 bigger chump blocker, plus you're going to start off at 8 loyalty if you plus right away instead of 5, which is a pretty big jump in loyalty. 8 is a lot for an opponent to beat through. So you make the plus to defend your Planeswalker, and then the negative ability destroys things. Yes, Elspeth kills a bunch of big creatures. Vraska, though, kills whatever's annoying you, including artifacts and enchantments, and you get some mana out of the deal, so it's actually gaining you a mana when you do that, which can be relevant. And then it has an ultimate that pretty much just wins the game. Elspeth usually just closes out the game if you get to the ultimate. I imagine that Vraska is going to be pretty much the same way. If you actually -10, it should be pretty tough to lose and not be able to get in that last point of damage. As far as standard is concerned, I think the sweetest home for Vraska that we see right now is probably some sort of like Jund mid-range. Could be Abzan as well, but Jund has some really sweet options because you have the ability to play Chandra on 4, and then the next turn you can use the Chandra mana to help cast Vraska. That's a lot of powerful Planeswalkers on the battlefield. Plus there's like Regisaur Elfo, which is just a great threat to block up the battlefield and maybe kill your opponent. Good removal like Fatal Push and Harness Lightning. So that's where I most see Vraska, is in some sort of really value-heavy, mid-rangey Jund-type deck. On the other hand, if the format is very tempo and aggro-oriented, Vraska could be in a bit of trouble. I mean, 6 mana is a lot, and 6 mana is even more when there's a Spell Pierce that can fizzle all your investment for just 1 mana, or if everyone's still playing Ramen Red and just going super aggro, gonna be hard to even live long enough to get down your Vraska. So I think Vraska is super powerful and likely quite playable. The question's gonna be, what does the format look like? Does the format line up in a way where you can play Jund mid-range, or some sort of like bug control type deck? If so, Vraska is going to be a great finisher, super powerful, closes out the game quickly, protects itself, does everything you want a big expensive Planeswalker to do. So we'll see what the format looks like, but I have high hopes that Vraska Relic Seeker is going to be pretty strong in Standard. We also got a couple really sweet transform cards. So first up, Growing Rites of Itlimoc, which is incredibly powerful. So looking at the front half, you're probably like, this doesn't look that great. 3 mana legendary enchantment. Look at the top 4, grab a creature from them when it enters the battlefield. Okay, I guess that's fine-ish. But you gotta remember, it flips around. So what does it flip to? It flips around into Itlimoc, Cradle of the Sun. And if you hadn't guessed it by Cradle in the name, it is a Gaea's Cradle with upside because it adds mana if you have 0 creatures. It is going to be super powerful. This card is busted. If you've never played with Gaea's Cradle, it is on the short list of most powerful lands ever printed. So it's definitely going to be worth the work of flipping around. So I think the comparison, I mentioned Gaea's Cradle for Itlimoc Cradle of the Sun. The front half is kind of like a worse and more expensive Oath of Nissa. It only hits creatures, which is a downgrade. It does get a little bit deeper, but you're really playing this with the hopes of flipping it around into Itlimoc Cradle of the Sun, the Gaea's Cradle side, because then you have so much mana. So I think in Standard, you have a few different ways of doing this. It's not that hard to have 4 creatures, and remember, it flips on your end step, which means you can play this. If you have 4 creatures, it's going to flip right away. So you could play this in just like Teamer Energy. It wouldn't be that hard. You got Servant of the Conduit, you play a Whirler Virtuoso, make a couple of Thopters with your energy, and boom, you suddenly have a Gaea's Cradle. I don't know exactly what you do with that mana, but you'll never complain about having a land that's tapping for like 5 mana. Like, it can never be a bad thing. There's no downside to that. Or you could play like a token deck. It could be very good there as well. Servo Exhibition, Strom's Expertise, super easy to get a bunch of creatures on the battlefield. Then you just have your Gaea's Cradle, make a bunch of mana, do something with it. As far as the payoff in Standard, this is where it gets a little bit sketchy. There's not a big obvious like, oh, this is what you do when you have a land that taps for 7 mana. You can play Dinosaurs, I guess. You can look for X spells. The two things that first came to mind for me, number one is Walking Ballista. Like, that's an easy mana dump. It's a mana dump when it's on the battlefield. It's a mana dump in your hand, even more efficient. And it's just a really good card. It's a creature in the early game to count towards Growing Rakes of Itlimoc. So all around, I think Walking Ballista is probably the most competitive payoff for having a land that's going to tap for a bunch of mana. But you could also go with like Torment of Hailfire, obviously tapping for 5 mana with 1 land. Definitely ups the X count on Torment and makes it way scarier. The other thing is, I think this card has potential in Modern. I'm not a Legacy expert. I've heard mixed things from Legacy players on Growing Ranks of Itlimoc. You gotta remember, in Legacy, you also have literal Gaea's Cradle, so you might not need to go through the work, but in Modern, you don't have a Gaea's Cradle, which means I think Elves could definitely take advantage of this. If you look at how Elves plays, they have so many mana dorks, so it's really easy to cast your Growing Rites of Itlimoc on turn 3 at the latest and flip it immediately, because you have like Llanowar Elves, you have Elvish Mystic, you have Dwinian's Elite, which makes multiple elves, Heritage Druid that lets you tap your elves for even more mana to cast Growing Rites of Itlimoc. So then you play this, you flip it around, and you have really good payoffs. I mean, you can go with Genesis Wave and basically just dump like 10 permanents on the battlefield. It should just win you the game. Or even easier, you have Chords of Calling. So you just chord out your Azuri, you use all that mana to overrun your elves a couple of times and close out the game that way. So that, I think, is probably the most obvious home in Modern, but it's really powerful. Just having a Gaea's Cradle in the format is very powerful. Speaking of transform cards, we have another sweet one. This is the blue one. It seems like this is a cycle of legendary enchantments that flip around in the lands. Search for Azcanta, which, I mean, it's fine as an enchantment. 2 mana, legendary. At the beginning of your upkeep, you basically scry 1, except instead of scrying to the bottom, you scry to your graveyard if you don't want to keep the card. Then if you get 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you get to transform into Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin, which is another super powerful land. Taps for blue mana, or you can pay 2 and a blue and tap it, and you get to look at the top 4 cards of your library, grab a non-creature, non-land card. So Planeswalker, Instant, Sorcery, Enchantment, Artifact, you name it, you get to put it into your hand and put the rest on the bottom of your library. So this is a great way to just dig through your deck. It's basically like you get a kind of Thassa, God of the Sea, as far as the scry mode. It never becomes a creature, obviously, and then once you flip around, you have this weird twist on Augur of Bolas, but it's repeatable, and it's only 3 mana, and you just keep digging through your deck and finding whatever you need. So I think it's going to be way easier than you think to flip this card in Standard. I mean, Strategic Planning is already seeing play. That puts 3 cards in your graveyard right away, not even counting the cards you can just mill with Search for Azcanta. And we also have like Censor, all the good cycling cards to fill the graveyard, Evolving Wild, just card draw spells like Glimmer. So it's going to be fairly easy to play this, mill a couple cards with it, play a couple cards like Strategic Planning, and all of a sudden you have this repeatable card advantage engine that just keeps digging through your deck, which makes it a great fit in control decks. I think this is the most likely home. You see Torrential Gearhulk type control decks. They already like cards in the graveyard because you got Torrential Gearhulk, you might have the Scarab God to reanimate creatures if that happens, and they're overloaded on spells, so you're just digging through for 3 mana after you flip, grabbing more counters, grabbing more removal spells, grabbing more card draw spells. It could also work really well in some of the reanimation decks we've seen with the Scarab God and like Liliana Death's Majesty. You don't have as many hits, I guess, as far as Search for Azcanta, but remember, remember, non-creature, non-land. That means you do hit your Liliana Death Majesty or any of your other reanimation spells, so even though you're probably going to have way more creatures than a Torrential Gearhulk control deck, you still should have a pretty good hit rate once you flip around your search for Azcanta. It could also see play in Modern, just because Modern decks are already built to fill their graveyard. If you look at like Tasigur and Grimag Angler Delve decks, it's very easy for them to have like 7 cards in their graveyard on turn 1. On turn 2, it's very quick with Thought Scours and Serum Visions and all the stuff that just stocks your graveyard for Delve. Now you can stock your graveyard for Delve, flip your search for Azcanta, and then still delve away those cards, because once you flip, it's flipped, and then you just use search for Azcanta to find your Fatal Pushes, to find Thought Seizes, to find counter spells to defend your big threat. So I think we have Modern potential for search for Azcanta as well. So another just super powerful flip card. Very excited for this one. I think it's going to be very, very strong in Standard and potentially Modern too. Next up, we have Flagship, which is another one of the new vehicles, and if there's one thing I'm pretty certain of as far as Ixalan is concerned, it's its Wizards went a little bit more conservative with vehicles this time around. I think they learned from Smuggler's Copter, from Heart of Kira, and even Aetherflux Harvester that they went a little bit too far in Kaladesh block pushing vehicles, because Flagship, why, it's fine, it's pretty tame. 3 mana, becomes a 3/3, but you got a crew for 3, which is a very high crew number. If it deals damage, you make your opponent discard a card, which is nice, but there's no sort of evasion or anything. So I think the big payoff here is it might be good in a pirate deck, because it gives all your pirates +1/+0. And that's if it's a creature, if it's not a creature, just a static +1/+0. So I think this mostly fits in some sort of like evasive piratey deck. I'm not even sure it's good enough there, but if it is going to find a home, it's going to be with Siren Storm Tamers, Fathom Fleet Captains, Kite Sail Freebooters. You have all these evasive pirates. Flagship pumps up their power, lets you get in even more damage. So maybe there's some potential there. I mean, it's possible. The problem is, it's just not good as a vehicle. If you look at the 3 mana vehicles we have from Kaladesh block, Aethersphere Harvester, crews for 1, gains lifelink, has flying, 2 more toughness. Cultivator's Caravan is a mana rocket, crews for the same, but it's a 5/5. Even Renegade Freighter, which doesn't see any play, when it attacks, it's a 5/4, way bigger than Flagship. It crews for less mana. So Flagship, I think if it has any chance at all of seeing play in Standard, it's definitely going to be because of the pirate text. We'll have to see if a pirate deck wants this effect. It's also somewhat competing with favorable wins and other pirate lords that we may see, because the vehicle part of Flagship just really pales in comparison to the vehicles we already have in the format. Next on our list, we have Rampaging Ferocidon, which is one of the crazier dinosaurs we've got in the whole set. 3 mana, you get a 3/3 with Menace, and it's kind of like a Hadasaur. Players can't gain life whenever another creature enters a battlefield. Rampaging Ferocidon deals 1 damage to that creature's controller. So this card is super powerful. It reminds me of some of the old hate cards we have. Stigma Lasher, Everlasting Torment, Sulfuric Vortex. Effects that make it so players can't gain life. Sulfuric Vortex is playable all the way back to Legacy, kind of a staple in Burns decks there to shut down life gain strategies. So Rampaging Ferocidon kind of does the same thing, except you also get a really reasonable body. If you look at 3/3 for 3, that's Boros Reckoner, that's Bogart Ram Game, that's Brazen Scourge, which, I mean, are not staples. No one's playing Brazen Scourge right now, but you're getting a reasonable body, and that's not even including the menace aspect of it, which makes it even better because it's a little bit evasive. So you're getting a strong body with a strong ability, and I think it's very good in Standard, specifically for Ramanamp Red. So if there's one thing that people bring in from their sideboards to fight against Ramanamp Red, it's mostly life gain. You see like Authority of the Consuls, you see Aethersphere Harvesters, you see Sunscourge Champion. Rampaging Ferocidon just shuts down that plan because your opponent can't gain life. Sure, you have an Aethersphere Harvester, it's just a 3/5 flyer. Your Sunscourge Champion looks pretty silly if it's not gaining life when it eternalizes. So Rampaging Ferocidon is at very least a great sideboard option for Ramanamp Red decks, and it might just have enough stats that you can play it in the main deck as well. So that's where I think it ends up. The other thing I wanted to mention with Rampaging Ferocidon is some people were like, well, I mean, yeah, it's going to make you lose life, though. You're going to play creatures, and you're kind of a creature deck, so you're hurting yourself. But if you're playing Ramanamp Red, You are the aggro deck. You have Lightning Strikes. You have Hazoret the Fervent. You have Ramanop Ruins. Yeah, sure, you're taking damage when you play a creature, but you're dealing so much damage to your opponent, that's going to be fine. I mean, if you look at older formats, it's very reminiscent of like Eidolon of the Great Revels or Pyrostatic Pillar. Yes, you are taking damage every time you cast a spell in your burn deck when you have a Pyrostatic Pillar or Eidolon out. Do you care? No, because your opponent's taking more damage and you're the aggressive deck that's dealing damage. So I think that's where Rampaging Ferocidon works. As far as Modern, there's also a bit of sweet hate potential there too. 3 mana is a little much. You already have Eidolon of the Great Revels, so we'll see if this could show up in Modern Burn. But it shuts down like the Soul Warden type decks, any sort of Soul Sister strategy. Very good against Lingering Souls. I mean, 1 Lingering Souls with Flashback is 4 damage going to your opponent when the creature's under the battlefield. Shuts down Kitchen Finks and other life gain sideboard options. So I think it's possible that Rampaging Ferocidon could at least be in the conversation for modern burn decks and aggro decks as well. But definitely a super on-curve card. Excited for this one in Standard. Shuts down a lot of random stuff that could be problematic for your aggro deck. Finally today, we got a bunch of commons and uncommons, and there's a few that are fairly exciting. So Chart the Course, Lookout's Dispersal, Stormfleet Spy, these are kind of our pirate cards for the day. Chart the Course is actually pretty powerful. Draw 2 for 2 is always worth taking notice of. It's kind of has spell version of Raid, so you got to discard a card if you didn't attack with a creature. But even draw 2, discard 1 for 2 mana isn't bad, and if you're playing an aggro pirate deck with a bunch of 1-drops, you should have attacked with something anyway, and then you're just getting a discount on a divination, which is a really powerful card. Lookout's Dispersal is basically a mana leak, an improved mana leak even, if you have a pirate. It's fine on its own. Paying 4 is a lot, so it'll often be a cancel or a slightly easier to cast cancel, even if you don't have a pirate. But I think this will really shine in the pirate tempo deck where you're playing 1-drop pirate, then you just have a mana leak for the rest of the game. And Stormfleet Spy, not super push, but it's worth mentioning. The ability to play a 3 mana 2/2, which isn't the worst, and draw a card when it enters the battlefield, could be something to consider in a pirate deck. If not, it'll at least be a sweet limited card. We also got a few sweet dinosaur cards. Commune with Dinosaurs does a great job of digging through your library to find your big dinosaurs. It's kind of like the ancient stirrings of the dinosaur tribe. So you get to look at 5, the top 5. That is going pretty deep, and grab a dinosaur or a land and put them in your hand. So this kind of does everything you want in your dinosaur deck. In the early game, you want to make sure you hit your land drops so you can cast your big dinosaurs. In the late game, you want to find your big dinosaurs. So I think if we see a dedicated dinosaur tribal deck, Commune with Dinosaurs has a great shot of showing up in it. Otapec Huntmaster is interesting. We haven't seen a lot of success with these effects in Standard, in Modern, the cost reduction effects, but a static -1 mana for all your dinosaurs is a pretty good deal on a 2 mana play. It lets you play this on turn 2, turn 3, you're already to like your Ripjaw Raptor, and then you're playing all your other big dinosaurs a turn earlier as well. And then giving your dinosaurs haste is actually pretty scary. You can just ball lightning your dinosaurs at your opponent's face. Finally, Dinosaur Stampede, probably a long shot, but it's worth noting that in a dinosaur deck, this does a pretty good overrun impression for 3 mana instant speed. If you're not giving your team trample, it's not that exciting, but if you have all dinosaurs, +2/+0 and trample for 3 mana, can close out a lot of games. Again, kind of like Otapec Huntmaster, these are effects that haven't seen that much Standard play, and I'm not sure you need to make your dinosaurs bigger, because they're already so big, some of them are already trampling, but you never know. It does equal a good way to close out a game by surprise at instant speed in Dinosaur Tribal. We also got an interesting vampire, Duskborn Skymarcher, mostly of note because it's a 1-drop, and if vampires are going to succeed, we need a 1-drop. It's not a great 1-drop. It only has 1 power. It can pump up attackers, which does give you a way to kind of mess with combat, makes it a little harder for your opponent to block, and it's evasive, so I don't know. I think there's a chance if Vampire Tribal really needs a 1-drop and we don't have better options, we could see Duskborn Skymarcher in Standard. Otherwise, a sweet limited card, very powerful and limited in a Vampire deck. Otherwise, a bunch of just kind of lower tier commons and uncommons. Wildgrowth Walker, interesting in an Explorer deck, but I'm not sure if an Explorer deck will be a thing. Skittering Heartstopper, kind of a Rats type card for limited, play it early, Death Touch, kills big things. Ryle is a sweet way to turn on your Enrage abilities in a dinosaur deck. Then we have Grazing Whiptail, kind of the giant spider dinosaur type thing, big and reachy. And then Thundering Spineback is a sweet casual dinosaur tribal card, but I don't think dinosaurs are really in the market for a 7-mana lord when it comes to building constructed decks. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Ixalan spoilers for today. So what do you think? How good is Vraska? What do you think about the new flip cards? Do any of the commons or uncommons stand out as obvious standard staples? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.